You get nice exposure balance, but your background is still dark. So in this situation, imagine like your subject is in the sun, but your background is in the shade. So it's naturally going to want to be black. It's naturally going to want to darken out. And when you're just reflecting that light back onto your subject, it doesn't necessarily affect your background at all. Now let's compare this to diffused light. In this situation, same figurine, same setup. What I'm doing instead is I'm literally shooting through a piece of, or two pieces of office paper, white office paper that I put in between my light source and my subject. Gives me a soft, well-balanced, even light. And it also helps balance out the subject exposure and my background exposure, which is why you see more of a lighter background there. A very common situation would be to use my diffuser panel on my 5-in-1 reflector kit. Moving outside, we are hopefully, thankfully, going to get into spring here really soon. I know, like most of Wisconsin, we actually got snow this morning here in Minnesota as well. It was a nice kicker in the spring because it was 60 3 or 4 days ago, and now it's 30. And that's just kind of how it is here in the Midwest. We deal with it. But I like to go photograph on my lunch break. If I'm fortunate enough to have good lighting, I'm going to find situations, something like this. You know, this is not a great photograph. This is a subject in the shade, and my background is bright and sunny. The lighting and the exposure is not balanced. There's too far of a difference between the two. And so the first thing you can do is look for either subjects with even exposure throughout, or you can create your own shade. In this situation, I took my 20-inch diffuser, just a round collapsible diffuser, and I placed it over my subject to even out that exposure and to soften the exposure to just get a really nice texture from left to right. Once you figure out your lighting, then worry about the composition. Worry about the image that you want to create. You know, try to build your scene depending on what you want it to look like. So I take my subject here, and then I get the composition that I like. This is not my backyard. I was fortunate enough to be out in California a couple of years ago when the super bloom was going on. So these are the poppies that are actually orange. They are out. These were photographed outside of San Francisco. Really fortunate to be able to see them all. The hillside was just orange. It was unlike anything I've ever seen before. But this, in my opinion, is a stronger composition, and this is the end result that process kind of came to. So these are considered close up. Something else to consider is, again, okay, when we're looking at flowers, what do people find interesting? What about the flowers do people generally gravitate towards? And for most photographers, it's that stamen, it's the pollen that's in the center of the flower. And so to turn those close-up images into macro work, here we're going to really just zoom in, get closer, and focus on the stamen or the center bit there. I love that this is a shallow depth of field. You know, it really allows my subject to separate from the background, to pop out a little bit. And then we just get a little bit of that touch of color of the pink and the greens in the background. This is a part of an orchid series that's at the Minnesota Arboretum. Another one. This is a cute little daisy that was sitting in. This is the one bloom I've gotten so far with my home plants. And first, I really loved how the window light was shining through and backlighting my subject. Had a really great transparent quality to it. And then I started kind of looking around and exploring, okay, what about this daisy is unique? What about it do I find interesting? And I found this little leaf on the bottom that reminded me of a heart shape. And so for me, yes, this is a close-up image, or this is an image of a daisy, but it's about that little shape, that little heart that I think gives people hope. It gave me a smile when I found it. All right, here's another example. Got a lot of plants in pots in my kitchen counter right now. I'm hoping to get them outside sometime soon. But this is another great thing that you can try when you're home, when you're just looking around for things to photograph. Again, I'm using my LED light. trying to light my subject. And I like the idea of this image, but for me, the background, even with, you know, shooting out the window like that, it was just really distracting. It wasn't helping the subject matter out at all. And so another little trick I like is you can actually have like 8.5 by 11 or 12 by 12 sheets of paper or fabric or, you know, really anything that you can knock out your background and create your own. This is the white background. I used a piece of styrofoam from something that I got in the mail the other day. I've also used white foam core. I've also used, you know, white office paper, spray painted onto, or like spray adhesives onto cardboard. You can use that 5-in-1 reflector kit again and just drop in a really nice, even white background. It elevates this image into something else. So again, we go to the original, natural. We go to the more commercial look with the white background. I can move to a gray background really easily. This was a gray knit stocking cap that what did I put this around? I think I put this around the 150 to 600, just something to help hold it up. And it's got a little bit more homey look to it, a little bit warmer. Same subject, same place, just trying to find a little bit of fabric to put something behind it to even out that background. I can even go so far as to find some remnant fabric that I have. You see the little swatch on the bottom that shows you what the background is. Because your background is so out of focus, unfocused, dropping in different backgrounds can very easily change the overall feel of your image. And it's a really great way if you're creating work for your own home to make sure that the backgrounds match, to make sure the color is in line with whatever decor you've got going on at home. Super easy. I'll also translate this idea into the garden. Again, I don't necessarily garden much. I'm not very good at it. My husband's better at it. But I've got friends that have these gorgeous wild gardens that are packed with blooms and flowers and different leaves and ferns. But in most situations, they get very distracting. There's so many textures, there's so many patterns going on that how do you simplify it? And the easiest way to simplify it is to bring little swatches of paper or fabric on a hard board and drop it in the background. Remnant fabrics are great for this. Scrapbooking paper is great for this. If you can get your hands on glitter paper, so that gold or that silver, that psychedelic sort of glitter paper, in the background, those specular highlights are absolutely amazing, and they're just kind of fun to play with. All right, moving on to jewelry. Jewelry or like metal objects, things that are reflective, things that are shiny, they are very hard to work with. Like flowers, I'll tend to use a circular polarizer whenever I've got a lot of harsh lighting. With flowers, with foliage, a polarizing filter can help with reds, with yellows, colors that are really reflective and tend to blow out easily. Using a polarizing filter will help cut out that reflected light and just let the true color shine through. Same thing with jewelry. You know, we want to be able to cut out as many reflections as possible so we can see the true color of the piece. We can cut out any distractions that might happen. I'm always going to diffuse my light whenever possible to help negate those hot spots of light. But if there's ever any that are unruly and you just can't find or get rid of, using a blackboard is really important. Now, a blackboard is a piece of black foam core, or I'll use black felt, or I'll use the black side of my 5-in-1 reflector kit, and I will like find my subject, figure out where the reflections are, and then I'll move my blackboard to cover up wherever that reflection is. If you're ever trying to get into street photography, I recommend trying to find objects, or don't let your reflection show up in the glass or in the image. With this, I was taken with a 35mm DI3. This is one of the Sony mirrorless primes. And I took the lens hood off, so it's just the bare glass, and I'm literally holding my lens directly in, like touching the glass, as close to the glass as I possibly can. And most photographers wear black because it doesn't reflect any color. It keeps you more out of the frame, less distracting. And so that way, using those two techniques, you can really help cut out your own personal reflection or the reflections from the street behind you in the photograph. This is more of a handheld example using the VC, using that low light technology. Most of the time when I'm photographing jewelry, I'm working on a tabletop or in a studio sort of setup. So I've got my camera on a tripod. In this situation, this is an example of flat lay macro. So my subject is on a flat table, generally on a kitchen table or something that's raised up a little bit so that it can be at my height instead of me getting down on the floor and getting down to their level. My camera is going to be shooting straight down, and then using hopefully a live view application. If you have that, this is going to help you create the scene and move the elements around so that you are telling the story that you want to tell. So in this image, I wanted to make sure the life in the lower right-hand corner was showing in just the right spot. Genuine, journey, these are words that I wanted to make sure and to include. The key, that main key that's in the foreground there, do I want it straight on? Do I want it at a slight angle? To the left, to the right? These are all little things, little adjustments that you can make to change the visual lines of the image. Now with metal, with kind of slippery subjects, glass beads is another one. I like to use a little bit of double stick tape on the back. This is an insider trick. You use a little bit of double stick tape on the back of the key, and then I'll generally like dab it on my jeans or on my sweatshirt or something to fuzz it up so it's not quite so sticky. And then I'll go through and create my scene. So that'll allow the metal and the keys or gears, pieces of broken CDs, you know, anything that's slippery like that, it allows them to stay put for you, and they'll stay where you put them instead of everything shifting right when you want to take the picture, and you'll spend most of your time just trying to set it up. Little fun fact. You can also use rubber cement. I've done that before as well. Last little bit I wanted to include is just some found objects, something to inspire you. One of the best things that we can take out of this time at home is just a renewed appreciation for the things you have, for you know, how fortunate we are, and how you can turn everyday objects into art. First one, these are some rusty, kind of really great antique patina oil pipes from my dad's farm. Can't remember if this is from like a lawnmower or a tractor or, you know, an air compressor or something, but I just really loved how the brass was all patina, the rubber was like all cracked and worn, and then just the subtle play of color there, the reds and the greens kind of playing off of each other with simple lines. Next one, this is an Edison bulb that's hanging above my kitchen counter right now. Edison bulbs are really trendy right now, and personally, I love that they kind of nod back to the old times, and how you can see all the filament and how they light up and all the different wires and how they're made. It's just got some really intricate line work. So to photograph this, the VC was very crucial because the light was actually dimmed, so it was barely on. It was on maybe like 10%. So I didn't have a lot of light. And the shutter speed was probably like 1/10 of a second again, or 1/20th of a second. And so I'm standing on my counter trying to photograph this, keeping my center, you know, nice and strong, keeping my breath very stable, taking multiple images to try to get the one in focus that I wanted. And I just think it turned out pretty cool. If there's anyone that cooks, love garlic. Garlic is a great subject matter. Oranges, apples, lemons, you know, even like the striations in a good steak. You know, these are all little things that have some great texture and some great personality to them that you can focus on. Here, this is from an old clove of garlic that I was using, trying to finish up the other night before dinner. And putting it on the dark wood of my cutting board kind of reminded me of an oil painting, like an old, I won't say like Rembrandt or something like that, but it just had some really nice soft colors and tones. Kind of reminded me of an old oil painting. The last one, it's an old cassette tape. just kind of neat. You know, again, looking for everyday objects. I just loved how the filament, how the little tape on the inside was kind of swishing back and forth, and just the subtle shapes of it all, the graphic nature of this subject matter. And I also love, you know, you can take a nod to, again, old technology with new technology. See if your nephews and nieces and the kids in your life know what this is, because not a lot of them in my family actually did until I showed it to them. All right, that's my last slide, everybody. At the end of the day, you know, thank you for spending time with us today. And please stay connected, you know, whether it's with the camera company. I love that you guys are available online. I love that you guys are there and you're willing to, you know, just really help support anybody who needs something photographic at this time. There's many dealers across the country who are not that fortunate, and we're going to see many of them kind of close down at the end of this. Socially, you can find me at Bell Tamron USA. You can direct message me, or, you know, send me pictures if you want feedback. I'm more than happy to help out in any way that I can. I'm going to turn the chat feature on. Looks like we've got a couple of questions. Yeah. Ward, was there anything else that you wanted to add, or Steve, since you guys are in here?
I don't have anything else. That was an excellent presentation. Thanks, Jillian. But
Thank you.
We do have some great questions too, so we'll get to those. Unless Steve has something to say.
I'll chime in at the end.
Okay.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks for the informative session. Yes, of course, Randall. I appreciate it. My slides are not personally publicly available, but if you would like a little handout or an outline, I can definitely send that to Ward, and you guys can take those tips home with you.
Okay, sounds good.
Mm-hmm. Is center-weighted focusing always used for macro and/or close-up photography? Yes and no. This is a stylistic sort of question. For me personally, the center-weighted focus is best for low contrast or moving subjects. It is the most sensitive for tracking and defined focus than, let's say, the edges of your sensor. When I use autofocus, which I do most of the time, I'm going to use a single point autofocus system. So if I want my subject over to the left or to the right, I'm going to actually move my focus point around shot per shot to make sure that it is looking exactly where that I want it to be. Many of my photographs you'll see are using a shallow depth of field. And I do this for a couple of reasons. With a shallow depth of field, it is easier to isolate your subject, and it's easier to create depth within such a small area. It's also easier to handhold, especially if you don't have a lot of light. If you have a shallow depth of field, you're going to get a faster shutter speed. And again, at the end of the day, it's easier to photograph that way. Can you give an example of when you'd use the limiter switch? Yes, Michael, I'd love to. The most common use for this would be in a low contrast situation. So if I'm photographing a, like a white orchid on a white background, there's not a lot of contrast there. And so I'm going to tell my camera that I'm going to only look at that close focus range. Or, let's say I'm using it for portraiture, because the 90mm is also a really great focal length for portraiture photography. And it's a really soft, cloudy day. There's not a lot of contrast in my subject matter. And if I notice that my lens is struggling a little bit, that's really the only time I'll switch it to anything other than full. If I notice my lens is struggling a little bit, at that point, I would put it on the non-macro or that middle position, saying, forget about the close stuff, just look out into the distance for my subject matter. Your flower macros handheld, or did you use a tripod or some other support? That is a really great question. All of the flower and the butterfly photos in this situation were handheld, for sure. Even the little monk dude, the portraits that I were taking, that was all handheld. My style is very handheld. I like to live in the moment. I like to look for inspiration. And so I will take many, many pictures and hope that a couple of them are very, very good. That's kind of the hindrance with handheld photography, is your percentage of perfection is not very high. So you're kind of playing around. The coin shot, some of these other ones at the end, like the watch, the keys, those are all tripod work. So I will bring my tripod into play anytime I need to be hands-free. So when I'm setting up a still life, or maybe I need to hold that flower in place because it's really windy, or maybe I need to hold my light and my reflector and I need to be more hands-free. Or if I'm in a situation where I know my shutter speeds are going to be too slow. So if I want a low ISO and I can't get a fast shutter speed, maybe I'm trying to get a longer depth of field. So again, those shutter speeds are really slow. I will use a tripod from time to time. And in those situations, if you're the type of photographer that likes manual focus, that likes a tripod, shut your stabilization off as well. It's a tricky thing where if you're completely stable, the VC will actually create its own motion to correct itself and your images won't be sharp. And this is seen across every brand. Doesn't matter if it's IS from Canon or VR from Nikon, the VC from Tamron, it all acts the same way. So do yourself a favor, if you're on a tripod, just go ahead and shut that stabilization off. I used the black shirt I was wearing. Yes, I've done that too. Again, we all wear black. I've actually had, I don't know if it was Steve or another sales rep, but I've had them stand in the background of my subject to have a black background. I'm like, can I just get your black polo in my background? And they're like, sure. Do I use auto ISO? Personally, no. I shoot in aperture priority most of the time, and then I set my ISO to get the shutter speed that I want. The only reason I use auto ISO is I've used it in football games before, like when I'm using like the 150 to 600 at a night football game. I will shoot manual in that regard, where I'll set my aperture, I'll set my shutter speed, but then I'll have my ISO be auto and use my exposure compensation if I need it brighter or darker. Because in a night football game, the light shifts so quickly, and I know that my shutter speed and aperture need to be like exact. I know what I want those two to be, so then I'll let my ISO kind of float up and down. I will admit that auto ISO it's been a lifesaver sometimes. And with the newer cameras, it's gotten a lot smarter, so it doesn't get grainy. Like high ISO now is not as noisy as it used to be. But the way that I was taught and the way that I use it, I just can't get myself to turn it on. It's totally unjustified, but I just can't get myself to turn it on. I prefer to have control over as many settings as I can. Oh, there's that. Let's see if I can scroll down. I accidentally put the chat window over my shared screen, so I can't move it. There we go. Put that over here. Was this recorded? Wade, did you record the presentation?
I did. I recorded it, and I'll have it up on our website tomorrow morning.
Perfect. You are welcome. Do I use a tripod? Yes, sometimes. The cool thing about using a tripod, and I know there's always a conversation. I work with my tech rep friend Jeff Allen, who's been in the industry and also a long time, and he and I have completely different styles. He is a tripod user. With his macro, he's always manual focused. He's got all the filters and the accessories and all of these things. So if I forget something, I know that I can borrow it from him. Really, at the end of the day, you're either like a freestyle macro artist with a handheld type photography, or you're a macro traditional artist with the tripod and the manual focus. I've noticed that with a tripod, I will get more consistent results. So I'll get better images faster with the tripod. But I do also understand that it's stressful, or it can give people anxiety when they're trying to work with a tripod, especially for macro photography, because when I see people setting up a tripod, and I personally used to do this myself, like you get set up, which means you pull your tripod out and fully extend all of the legs, and then you just set it down, and that was your setup. But for macro photography, that's not necessarily the view that you want to capture. So when I use my tripod, especially in a non-controlled environment like a garden or a conservatory or something like that, I'll set it away for a moment, and I'll actually kind of I'll view the area. I'll kind of get to know my subject a little bit and figure out exactly what perspective I want to photograph that subject from. And then I'll bring my tripod in and move it to the perspective that I've already determined is the photograph that I want to take. Kind of simplifies it, and we don't have to dance back and forth so much. Yes, the lens also does make beautiful portrait lenses. So macro, like the 90mm macro is interesting in the fact that its field of view is completely linear, it's flat. So in a portrait setting, if you can set your subject up against a brick wall or some sort of, linear sort of background and shoot them at an angle, it's going to have a very nice diffusion sweep from left to right. It's just going to very easily go out of focus for you. And that is unique to a macro lens. The 85mm, which is a similar focal range, its field of view is curved. So we're looking at a concave field of view versus a straight field of view. So this has a different shallow depth of field perspective than the linear one. I'm trying to get my hand just right. And that technology is why, if you have a wide angle shot of a group photograph, they're traditionally in a horseshoe sort of pattern because you're following the depth of field curvature of the lens. Taking many pretty good macro photos, especially with flowers. Yeah, the 16 to 300, John, the new 18 to 400, even the 70 to 210 f4. These are some really great macro. They're close up, so we're going to get an image that's about a 4x6 or a 3.5 by 5 inch area. But they're absolutely great in program mode and aperture priority. It just kind of adds that another step of versatility to the Tamron line. Can I use this lens for other types of photography? Yes, Wendy, we've talked about that a little bit. What tips do you have for stabilization with an older Tamron 90? Michael, if you can clarify a little bit, is it the one that has VC, or is it completely non-stabilized, non-focused? So like if it's the old 90, because this is a lens that's been made since 1992. It's been around in our line for a long time. Non-VC. So when you stabilize an older lens, it's all about your shutter speed. If you are hand holding that lens, make sure that you have your stance. You've got your elbows in, you've got your core nice and tight, you've got your legs at a wide stance, trying to keep yourself as stable as possible. And then before I take the image, when I hit the shutter button down, I'm going to breathe out at the same time. A lot of snipers use this as well. This is like the most stable way that you can take a photograph. The other thing you can do to combat slow shutter speed is just up your ISO if you're able. Jill from 3 years ago would have never taken a photograph at 256,000 ISO. And I tried it and it wasn't terrible. So I do that now sometimes if I absolutely have to. If you are traveling and can't carry a macro lens with you, is there any recommendations for settings for all around lenses 70 to 200 on your camera most of the time? That's a great question, Mary. If you have a zoom lens, this is kind of a comment from the beginning of the presentation. The 70 to 200 doesn't necessarily have a great close-up capacity to it. You can do like 1 to 4. So I'm talking about like a subject that's maybe a 5 by 7 inch area. 70 to 210 has a better macro feature to it. But the trick with a zoom lens is simply zoom it all the way out. So in this case, you would zoom your lens to 200mm, and then you would get within the minimum focusing distance, which I think for that lens is 3.5 feet. We measure that distance from the sensor plane. We don't measure it from the end of the lens. So what I'll do is, it's basically 3.5 feet from your eye, zoomed out at 200mm is going to be the best macro you can get with your lens. Try it out. Let me know how it goes. You are welcome. Do you ever photograph in full sunlight or primarily an early or late day? That is a wonderful question. I generally always shoot in full sunlight. I am not a morning person. If I can get up before 8 a.m., it's a good day. This is another reason why I gravitate towards macro photography, because you don't have to get up in the early morning. You don't have to stay up super late. You can photograph in any type of weather at any time of day. I do have some lilies on my lake later on this summer that I will get up early and photograph them with the sun coming up. Just having that light kicking behind them and this beautiful lily flower on the lily pad under the lake is kind of fun. But if that happens, I'm generally going to take a nap after lunch. No lie. Yes. Ugh. Non-VC is hard. The best thing you could do is either get a tripod or a monopod, sandbags, clamp it down. You can also bring the subject to your setup. So I was photographing with the old 90, which I think is the one that you're talking about. And I wanted to photograph like fall leaves, just kind of walking around a city park. And what I ended up doing is I did use my tripod and I set up a piece of campfire wood that was charred and like all gray and black and charcoal on a picnic table. And I used that for the background of my photograph. So imagine my tripod is set up and my 90 is literally setting on the edge of the picnic table, again, just to keep everything stable. And then I put my wood, that's what we want to do, my wood right there with the leaf on it. It was really easy. The imagery looked like I had found it, but at the end of the day, I completely set it up, and that is perfectly fine. You are welcome. Does it make sense to have a macro for Lego miniatures? Yes. No, definitely get the 90. Brian, you are someone after my own heart. Yes, please. So the thing with Legos, if you want to fill the frame with Legos, because they're so small, you need the 90 millimeter. The 85, its minimum focusing distance is over 3 feet, and it just does not have that close-up capability. You can get around it. You can do macro with the 85 millimeter if you use like an extension tube set, you know, a little spacer that you set in between the lens and your camera body. This will kind of cheat the camera to think it's close, you know, further away than it actually is. But I haven't tried that yet. I might have to. Anything else? We're going on at about an hour, which is exactly the amount of time I was kind of setting out for this today. I'm really glad you guys got so much out of it. The next thing that I am doing, and then I will read yours, Randall. If you look on the Tamron webpage, or I don't know if Steve's been sharing this stuff, but we have the 5 at 5. The tech team has put together their 5 favorite images, and Tamron has been highlighting them daily at 5 o'clock. Our next assignment is to do, you know, more of a 10-minute live, well, not live, but like a recorded video on, mine is macro project at home. So I'm working on some like water splash stuff. I'm working on some droplets. I'm working on some other just kind of fun, creative things that you can do. I'm a professional educator. Your session was organized and delivered. Aw, professional level. Randall, I really appreciate that. If by chance you are working in the academic market, my other passion is academics, universities, college level students, and faculty. Tamron EDU was revamped about 2 years ago, and we do offer educational savings for any photo students, anybody on the college level, or like any faculty, no matter if it's high school or university, or staff photographers from the school district as well. So keep that in mind. That helps sometimes. Oh, you guys are so kind. Thank you so much. All right. If there's any other, oh, perfect. I'm glad, Randall. He did use the EDU discount. Yay. All right. If there are no other questions, I'm going to turn it back to Ward and Steve. They handle more of the sales end of it. Steve is really great. He's our Great Lakes regional sales rep. If you're ever at a Tamron demo in the Great Lakes region, so Michigan, Wisconsin, a little bit of Illinois, you will find him behind the counter. And he makes sure that stores like the camera company are taken care of. So if you guys have any questions, he's generally the first line of support. And if he can't figure it out or if he needs more of a technical assistance, that's what he calls us in.
Exactly.
I love geeking out with you guys. It's been fun.
Yep.
You gonna say something, Steve?
Yeah, just wanted to remind everybody that you had mentioned earlier that there are some great deals going on, some free circular polarizers on certain lenses. There's the other thing that's going on right now, we always have some type of rebates going on. There are instant savings on a lot of our lenses right now, up to $200. For example, we introduced recently a 35mm 1.4, which is the best 35 1.4 in the world.
Yeah.
That's what all the reviews are talking about. And for the first time ever, there's a rebate on that. There's an instant savings on that of $200. So it's a great time to pick one of those up. We also just introduced for you Sony users, we just made an introduction the other day about a 70 to 180 2.8. A lot of people have been waiting for an affordable, sharp, excellent option for a fast telephoto for their Sony E-mount camera, and that was introduced at $11.99. We haven't started shipping those yet, but you can pre-order them. You can contact Ward. But please support the local camera companies like the camera company in Madison. They need your support more than ever right now. We don't want to lose, Jillian mentioned, we're going to lose some local camera stores by the time this thing all ends up. So we don't want to lose. We want to try to keep that to a minimum. So if you support your local camera store, they'll be willing to help you out. We need to have these people so that we can do things like this. We can do workshops, seminars in the stores when we get back to that. And you have somebody to talk to and help you with when you have issues or have questions. You need somebody to be able to turn to and walk into their store. So we appreciate that. Everybody stay safe and have fun taking pictures.
Thanks, Jillian and Steve. Appreciate the presentation.